I've been a musician since I've been about 10 years old, and I noticed that a lot of the musicians that I loved the most were barefoot. Blues singers, and they seemed to be the ones that were really connected. And I remember I went to a specific show from this one kid that was Johnny Lang. It's this young, this was like 15 years ago, a young blues player, and he came out barefoot, and for whatever reason it clicked for me, and I just stopped wearing his shoes a lot of times. Sometimes I'll do it just to be funny. In Chicago, there's a foot of snow on the ground, you walk in with no shoes, and everybody goes, well, they're not sure at first. They think either I'm out of my head or that there's some sort of great, profound spiritual purpose to it, and maybe it's a little bit of both. But so now that I've talked about the possibility of my being off kilter, I'd like to ask you to close your eyes. Don't worry, I won't do anything while your eyes are closed. Just be aware of your breath. Be aware of your breathing. Let go of trying to put it into any specific pattern. Just take a bit of a metaphorical step back and just be aware of your body breathing. Are you breathing or are you being breathed? Do you see or are you being seen through? Are you living a life in parentheses or are you being lived? What I'm here to share with you today is how to be lived through. The rest are details, truly. Remain aware of your breathing as I offer you the Aramaic prayer of Yeshua, the Our Father, the Lord's Prayer from Matthew and Luke, Matthew and Luke. Just be aware of your breath. Abund vashmaya mit karashma te malkutah nehwe tibia nakaikana vashmaya abara hablan lachmadesun kanan yaumana washwachlan haubain waktahain I can't abharan shwakin lahayavin. Wila tahlan lehnitzione. Ilapatsan membisho. Metol de lakhim akuthak wahalwa tishbukta. Lalam almin. Amen. Slowly open your eyes, come back to this room. How's everybody feeling right now?
Great.
I'm not asking about, what's running through your mind. Anybody's mind racing like crazy? No. Most of Yeshua's teachings, the one we know is Jesus, most of his teachings, when viewed from the perspective of the language they were originally spoken in the context of that language 2,000 years ago as opposed to today, because people do still speak Aramaic today, though some of the meanings have changed a lot. When we view it from that perspective, we awaken something within ourselves as we read those words on the page. It moves away from being a relationship. We don't realize that we get into this drive to learn concepts, and we're looking for the next this, the next that, like the next workshop, the next speaker, the next book, and then I'll be okay. Once I learn the key, the secret, then I'll be okay. Just that one more thing, and I know everybody here relates to that. But in the words of St. Francis of Assisi, he said, what you are looking for is what is looking. Is everybody breathing? When I say that, I know you're breathing, but I mean, are you aware that you are breathing? Breathing out, I know that I am breathing out. Breathing in, I know that I am breathing in. In the words of Thich Nhat Hanh, dwelling in the present moment, I know this is a wonderful moment. What you are looking for is what is looking through you, is what is seeking through you. Is anybody having a shift in your perception right now? A little bit of a, almost watching yourself, observing from behind yourself? There are times when Yeshua said things speaking about himself. Let me actually address the Yeshua thing first, in case you're wondering why I'm using that name. The word Jesus comes from the Greek and, to a certain extent, the Latinized version of his name, which is Jesus, which means to hail Zeus. Some scholars also say it means little Zeus, but it definitely clearly means hail Zeus. His name in his native Aramaic, Yeshua, Yah means who. But it doesn't mean who in the way that we think of who. It doesn't mean who as in like Dale, who. What it actually means is who. What you're looking for is what is looking, the who inside of the who. The consciousness behind our own consciousness. Do you understand what I'm saying? It means who. It points back to Yahweh, which is the non-manifest, unknowable God. And Shua means essentially cleanse, sweep, restore, salvation, save. It means to sweep away something. You can almost imagine like a broom sweeping something away, one who returns to an original state. Yahweh, the consciousness of all life is salvation, saves, etc. That's what the name Yeshua means. But it's kind of like the name John back then. Like you'd turn into a crowd and there's 100 people and you'd yell, Yeshua, and 30 guys would turn and look at you. So you can't put too much credence into that. Now I skated over something that I'm going to revisit just really quickly, which is when I said Yahweh is unknowable. Now what I mean by that is, I'll speak a lot more about this afternoon in the workshop, but when I make a statement like that, what that means is that, and it's in the Hebrew Shema, Yeshua said it many times, that the Lord our God, the Lord is one. If you know God, how many are in the room? You plus that which you know. So if you speak about how I know God in my life, that's nice. It's a little deeper than belief in the way that we think of it. But one of the things that I often say is that you truly cannot know God, Yahweh, the non-manifest, Allah in Aramaic. The word Allah in Aramaic literally means absolute only being. So if Allah, God, is the absolute only being, what does that say about each and every one of us in this room? If there's only one being, and the reason God is unknowable is simply because you truly can't know God, you can only be God. But of course, when you put the word God into that, your ego immediately comes in. It's one thing to say I am, it's another thing entirely to say I am God. Because as soon as you tag that last word on there, your mind, your ego immediately runs to it. But we also get into other quagmires, besides the experiential aspects that have either been removed or misunderstood. Words don't mean the same thing in two different languages. And it's not just Aramaic into English, it's any language into another. And I always, no matter what my subject, I almost always hit on this, just to give you a better understanding of what I'm trying to communicate. I have a cousin who lives in the south of France. Her name is Deborah. And she lives on the French Riviera, on the Mediterranean, halfway between Spain and Italy. She's an artist, of course. And all of those idyllic French Riviera things that come into your mind, not so far from Monaco. And let's say that I go over and I spend a week with her and she introduces me to a friend of hers and he and I get along real well, but I don't speak French and he doesn't speak English. And every once in a while, I'll say something to her to tell him and she'll look at me and go, I don't know how to say that in French. There's no word for it. Or maybe it happens in the other direction. She looks at him and says, I can't tell him that. There's no English word for that. Or possibly, let's say that I'm spending an amazing time. The three of us are having a great time, but everything I have to say goes through her. And she says something right at the time when we're parting, and I'm leaving, and I had this amazing time. He's become a really true friend. And she turns to, well, I turn to her and I say, tell him I said he's bad. Just tell him I said he's bad. And she turns and she goes, Dale says that you are no good. He said you are bad. Now, is that wrong? It's actually bulletproof. It's a 100% perfectly accurate translation. But did she translate or communicate anything of what I was actually trying to communicate? She translated exactly the opposite of what I was trying to say. And that's all over the Aramaic teachings of Yeshua, including in the supposed Greek originals. You look in those Greek originals and you see Aramaic idioms that while we may not have Aramaic originals that they were translated from, they were definitely translated from Aramaic into Greek to get them onto the page. And a lot of people will argue about Aramaic or Greek, which came first in terms of writing his teachings down. And even if Greek was the first written one, it still had to come out of the Aramaic into Greek. And there's a major danger there. It's an interesting thing. Imagine that here we are in a primarily English-speaking country, and let's say that we decided we were just going to start recording all of our holiest books and the things of our politics and our history. We decided we were just going to start recording it all in Russian. Does that make a lot of sense? Or maybe certain terms also, certain words like the word spirit. Spirit is actually a Latin word. Yeshua may have heard that word spirit in his life, but he wouldn't have thought of it the way we think of spirit. Let me ask you something. If I say, what does spirit mean? If you're truly honest about that, you can't quite get your fingertips on the meaning of what that word spirit means. It's something that's just outside of your grasp. But if I told you the word spirit in Aramaic is ruha, which more accurately means breath, you've got a much more intimate, very intimate relationship with breath. Breath and spirit was the same word in Aramaic. The chances of him actually using the word spiritus from the Latin are close to zero. It would be like me learning the word in whatever Portuguese, and every time I was speaking English and I got to the word spirit, I would instead use the Portuguese word, which is actually a form of the Latin word, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. He would have used the word ruka. Now, every time you see that word spirit in a lot of his teachings, if you took the word spirit and just crossed it out in almost every case and wrote the word breath above it, you'd have a much more accurate understanding of what he was trying to communicate. Another one of those terms that got lost is actually the word heaven. And what I'm going to talk about this morning is about the process of awakening heaven in your life. Heaven's one of those terms that is, when I say heaven, be honest, where does your attention go? It goes up. It immediately goes up. And yet he said, if heaven is in the sky, then the birds will precede you. We'll get there first. If heaven is in the water, then the fish will get there first. It's also interesting, too, that we're waiting for the return of the kingdom today. We're waiting for the kingdom to come. And I'm going to share a few things that he said 2,000 years ago about the kingdom. But that word that was translated as kingdom of heaven is Malkuta Dashmaya. In Matthew 4:17, he makes a statement. He says, repent. This is from the King James. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near. In Aramaic, that would be Toubo Kerbat Lager Malkuta Dashmaya. Who can say that back? That word Toubo is an interesting word. That's the word that was translated as repent. Now, let me ask you something. What does repent mean?
Be sorry.
Be sorry. What else? I love it when someone's honest about that. Yeah. A lot of people won't answer the questions because they know I'm sort of setting them up or something. But
Promise I didn't do it again.
Promise I won't do it again. Repent! It's that whole southern wall. There was a great, actually, if you watch the everything's on DVD now, but the Waltons, and you watch John Ritter when he played Reverend Fordwick, and he got into that whole repent. He was perfect with it. This was before Three's Company, and then he was on both shows at the same time, doing the Waltons and Three's Company at the same time, which are like polar opposites. Yeah, my kids were excited because they saw Three's Company for the first time, and they went, "That's not like the Waltons, is it?" But that word repent in Aramaic, it's also the same in Arabic, very similar in Hebrew. That word is Toubo, and the literal translation of that is turn back. Literally what it means is to make a 180-degree turn from facing out to facing inside. It means go back to the beginning, back to the source of your being, back to what is looking through you, because what you are looking for is what is looking through you. To connect back into that. So what's the kingdom of heaven, though? It says, repent, turn back, turn inside, for the kingdom of heaven is near. There's a lot of words we don't know what they meant. The manna in Exodus fell from where? Heaven. Where's heaven? Inside. So Peter bread was launching out of their chest. Not quite. That word manna in Aramaic, it's an Aramaic word, mana. It actually means, what is it? What it means is that this is the essence of something else. This represents something else. It literally means true sustenance from within. It's the same as the word lachma, very similar to the word lachma in the Lord's Prayer that says, "Give us this day our daily bread." That word lachma means true sustenance from within. Not necessarily that bread was falling out of the sky, but they connected into the true sustenance of life itself by turning back inside and not seeking the answer somewhere else. Now, there's a lot of different things that Yeshua said about heaven, and I'm going to quote someone here just real quick, which is a scholar who, anybody who's ever really studied the scholars within the last 40 years, Marcus Borg is a treasure. He's a jewel. I'm going to read something about a little bit of a quagmire that he went through and this is exactly something that I went through myself in my early teens. I went through this very similar thing. That's one of the reasons I think that I relate so much to him. And he speaks of the problems he was having at the time. He says, the problems began not with Jesus, but with God. Sometime in elementary school, my first theological conundrum occurred. I remember being puzzled about how to put together two different things I had heard about God. One, that God was everywhere present, and two, that God was up in heaven. Without realizing it, I was wrestling, I'm from New Jersey. I was wrestling with the relationship between the omnipresence and the transcendence of God. Between the difference between God being everywhere present all at the same time and God being somehow up in heaven. Now, when you hear the word up from Aramaic, it doesn't necessarily mean up out into the sky. What that most often means, especially in Yeshua's teachings, is higher realms of awareness, higher dimensions of awareness, less manifest, less obvious. The word manifest is a Latin word that means obvious. Not something that you can clearly define, but something that is higher than that. And I'm coming back to that same quote again. What you are looking for is what is looking. You're seeking a masculine manifest, something that you can clearly define, then yet what's looking through you is what you are actually seeking. I know there's shifts happening because I can see it. And I'm going to tie some things together here, so if anybody's in like a not quite there state, I'm going to read you a few things about heaven. But I'm going to preface this with something. Thursday morning, I was here in Texas last weekend at Cathedral of Light. A lot of light here. That's beautiful. And then I was back home, and both of our kids, we have a 9-year-old son, Mikey, and an 11-year-old daughter, Lucinda. And my wife took the day off Thursday because my stepmother is going through cancer. And we just went through this 3 years ago with my mother. And if anybody's listened to my CDs, it's in there in a few places. And my stepfather was back in March. And we had arranged it so that we were going to go and see her. I told the kids, this is probably the last time you're going to see her. And they just went through this. And this is a third grandparent in 3 years. And I said, it's interesting because I never wanted to fall on comforting of, she's going to heaven kind of a thing without explaining that to them first. But we had it all organized. First thing, Thursday morning, we were going to get up, drive the 2 hours from Asheville, North Carolina. I live in the mountains. Yes, heaven on earth. I know what you're saying. But to drive that 2 hours into Statesville where my father lived, and my stepmother is in the hospital, and we got a call when the phone rings in the middle of the night. It's usually not very good news. It's not like, hey, I got a promotion. Yeah, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Shut up. Hang up the phone. Call me later. There's my father. And we were just, in a few hours, we would be at his house. And he said, she's gone. It happened. He said he got a call. He was there from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. He went back home, slept for a couple hours. At midnight, the hospital called him and said, there's been a change in her condition. You need to come back. And on the way from leaving his house to getting to the hospital, it happened. So I sit my kids down Thursday morning after we try to go back to sleep and then wake up again. And of course they're like, oh, we're going to see Nana. We're going to see Nana. They want to see their grandmother. And what's the first thing I did? One thing that parents usually don't do. I was breathing. I was very present, very aware. And I said this to them that, this happened. You're not going to be seeing her today. And we had this, it was interesting how when I was sharing that with them and observing their process and mine, and me looking at them flashing back to myself when this was happening to me, 30 years ago, and almost this like here and there kind of an aspect, and how I remember when I was a kid, the thing that got me through stuff was knowing that they were going to heaven. And then how a few years after those kinds of things started happening, the heaven thing got messed up for me because I realized, okay, it's not someplace in the clouds that people float up to when you die. But there's something Yeshua said. For one thing, there's no clearly defined word in ancient Aramaic that means afterlife. That's kind of important, isn't it? In modern Aramaic, they use an ancient word, bashmaya, as the word for afterlife, but what that actually meant then was the world that is yet to come, which means future. They did not see life as or death as an opposite to life. They saw nothing as an opposite to life. They saw only life. They saw death as an opposite of birth. An eternity that is ever blossoming, and there's a peaking from eternity into form, into this physical body, and then peaking back out. So they didn't honor that there was anything after life. They saw that there is only life. And what is opposite of life would be in the Lord's Prayer, when I wrote up here, it said, do not let me lose my true self in forgetfulness. Lead me not into temptation. In Aramaic, it doesn't say lead me not. It says do not let me enter, or do not leave me in temptation. And the temptation is to forget who we truly are. That you are eternity. Now. Here and now. How many of you actually have a direct experience of that in your life? I am eternity. This is exactly what Yeshua was saying to us in John 3:16. He was saying it to Nicodemus. But I'm going to read you a couple quotes from the Coptic Gospel of Thomas about heaven. Coptic was an Egyptian language that was written down with Greek letters. They used Greek letters and then they added a few more. A lot of what we have on our monetary system today is Coptic. The all-seeing eye, the pyramid, etc. Saying 111, the heavens and the earth will be rolled up in your presence. And one who lives from the living one will not see death. Does not Jesus say, whoever finds himself is transcendent to the world? The heavens and the earth will be rolled up in your presence. That word in Coptic translated as rolled up means interspersed or threaded into your presence. He said the kingdom is near. Turn back to the center point of your being, because the kingdom of heaven is threaded into who you actually are. Not located somewhere else. It is the essence of who you are. And when you awaken to that, heaven and earth become rolled up, interspersed, threaded into your presence. Consciously, you wake up to that. And one who lives from the living one will not see death. Whoever finds himself is transcendent to the world. What does transcend mean?
Tradition. Bigger than we can go through.
What was that you said?
Bigger than or can pass through.
He got it right on the head. The New Age concept of rising above is what we tend to think of, rise above your problems. But then the next time you come up to a similar issue, it's right here in your face again, because you did not process it. You ignored it and tried to sort of climb over the top of it, and then just went on your cute little way. So every time it keeps coming back, and it's like tentacles in your face, because you didn't process it. If you connect into eternity, go back to that by breathe, and I'll give you the exact process of how to do that this afternoon. The Beatitudes were a specific step-by-step process for how to reawaken heaven in your life and to live from that. It's very specific in the Aramaic. If you look at it in the King James or even in the Greek, they're just theological promises, do this and you get that. There was a lot more going on there, and they each build on themselves so that when you get the first down, then you move to the second. And when you get the first and the second, then you move to the third, honoring the second and the first, etc. And they build on each other, especially in the first 7 in Matthew. And I talked specifically about what those meant. But what it actually meant was to move beyond look beyond everything that you're seeing outside of yourself, to turn back within and move through whatever your issue is, processing it by being 100% fully present with it. And like I say, especially the first 3 Beatitudes are a specific technology of how to process through those issues in your life. Those things that make you just want to pass out and stick your head in the sand. As an example, I said the word spirit. The first Beatitude is, blessed are the poor in spirit. It's funny because some people are going, I don't remember. Blessed are the poor in spirit. But spirit means, more accurately, breath. So what does it mean to be poor in breath? It's not your breath. It is the breath of God breathing through you as you. When you honor that, what's the first thing you do when that person walks into the room that you don't want to tolerate, you don't want to see them? Somebody pulls out in front, it's Dallas now, come on. Somebody pulls out in front of you on the highway, what's the first thing? You stop breathing. That was the first Beatitude. Breathe. Honoring that that's not your breath that you're forcing into the situation, but that's literally the breath of God breathing through you. That changes everything. And that's just one specific thing. Now, let me read something else from Thomas. He says, well, his disciples said to him, when will the kingdom come? His response is, and you'll find this in the Gospels also, it will not come by waiting for it. It will not be a matter of saying, here it is or there it is. Rather, the kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and men do not see it. He said 2,000 years ago that the kingdom of the Father was spread out upon the earth, but people could not comprehend it, could not see it, could not grasp it, did not realize that. He said that 2,000 years ago, and yet so many people are waiting for it to show up now.